This is the fourth paper in the WRR that we're launching. And the first paper that we launched was the framing paper, and then we had the housing paper and the energy paper. And so we have a series of sectoral papers and thematic papers. Next, hopefully, will be the paper on urban expansion. And we have one coming out on transportation and one on water and sanitation. And we also have our series of 8 city-level case studies of 8 cities in the global south. But just to remind you sort of where this paper sits in this larger body of work, the WR framing started with this kind of older conceptualization of sustainability about thinking about the interrelatedness of economic, social, and the ecological. So we sort of took this older triangle, which was actually came out of a book, interestingly enough, that was edited by Andrew Steer, because it was in a chapter, and so we didn't realize till later that that chapter was embedded. It was actually the earlier work of Andrew Steer thinking about sustainability as the interrelatedness of these 3 spheres. And we turned it on its side and we said, we feel, for a variety of reasons that are argued in the framing paper, that cities need to think about equitable access to core service. That's the entry point for urban sustainability, and that can lead to economic productivity as well as environmental quality, because we thought that cities that were rapidly urbanizing, lots of people at both ends of the economic spectrum were self-provisioning. They were self-provisioning in very inefficient and unsustainable ways. And so we felt that we really needed to focus on core services, but we did not want to get into this kind of sectoral trap thinking about the services. So we also thought we need to think about how cities change over time, how change is institutionalized, hence the need for sort of these different regional case studies to think about cities at this other level. So this paper, in some senses, is a thematic paper that really thinks about how cities can become more economically productive. And I'm going to argue and show you data today that shows you how large the informal economy is. And in cities in the global south, the informal economy is the majority, I'm going to argue to you, is the majority of your economic activity. And I'll talk to you about some definitions and status, because there's often confusion around informality. And then I have a series of case studies about how many cities have had in the past, as they're rapidly urbanizing, exclusionary practices towards informal workers and their economic activities, and give you some examples of what progressive cities are doing in terms of including and supporting informal work and its relationship to broader economic development and growth, and how this can be used to achieve a more equal city. So that's where this paper sort of fits into the larger project. So data on the informal economy is difficult to come by. It's not collected uniformly around the world, but and WIGO has been very involved in collecting and coming up with these different definitions and working with the International Labor Organization. It is estimated, and I'll show you how the informal economy is represented in a series of cities in the global south, to be anywhere between 50 and 80% of urban employment. And it generates 1/4 to 1/2 of gross domestic product. Where we have good data about urban informality is Mexico, where it generates about 60% of them, it represents about 60% of the Mexican workforce, and about 30% of Mexico's gross value added is generated through informal work. And we argue in the paper through a series of examples, and I'll show you in the slides, that I think one of the problems with how people have thought about informal work and informal economic activity is we often think about this as dichotomous, right? That you sort of have formal and you have informal, but informal work is very much linked to formal economic activities, and it's linked into these global supply chains. And so we're arguing that cities need to think about better ways to support informal workers and move away from sort of a hostile attitude of the past. This is kind of the highlights from the paper. And so when Marty and I started talking at Quito and then in subsequent months about how this huge area of economic work could be sort of analyzed in relationship to the WR and what we were trying to do, we decided to focus in on 3 self-employed types of workers, because we felt that these workers had their livelihood and their productivity was most influenced by cities. So if you are a construction worker, or you're a domestic worker and you work in someone's home, your relationship is primarily with your employer. But with these self-employed workers, with home-based workers, street vendors, and waste pickers, how the city interacts with you in terms of public space, in terms of provision of services, in terms of your ability to procure waste, that has a large impact on your ability to generate economic activity and a livelihood. Okay, so again, this is sort of the regional picture with informality in Africa, Asia and the Pacific, and the Americas. And there's a small note on this chart because you can see in Africa, and it gives you I've sort of put the highest and lowest cities together in that region, the cities that we actually have data on the informal economy. Actually, some of the largest levels of informality are thought to be in South Asia, but it's often masked when you look at the region as a whole. So these were the three reasons that we focused on home-based workers, street vendors, and waste pickers. The first is they represent a very significant share of urban informal employment, particularly in this domain of self-employed workers. And that, as I was saying earlier, city policies have a very large impact on their ability to be productive and their ability to sort of earn a livelihood. And we thought that the needs of these three groups of informal workers was emblematic of the needs of other informal workers as well. So as I was saying earlier, Marty Chen was the lead author on this paper, and we've worked with her since we sort of decided to join forces in Quito. WeGo has been around for more than 20 years. They have 1,000 affiliates in more than 90 countries, and they focus on increasing the voice, visibility, and validity of informal work through statistics and research, through advocacy and outreach, and they're strengthening these networks and the organizations of informal workers. And so I want to say one other thing about this that I think might be a little bit interesting to our WRI colleagues, is that in some ways, where we do a lot of different types of research, this paper that we're launching has an analysis of data on informality, but in a lot of ways, it's a research paper based on WeGo's experience over the last 20 years. It's really experiential in terms of its data and the cases that it draws on. And so in that way, it's very qualitative, it's very experiential. It's really a different kind of paper than we've had in the past, I think, in the WRR. And I think it's a new way to think about research for WRI in terms of thinking about the link between research and experience and advocacy and where those intersect. Very quickly, a lot of times when people talk about the informal economy or the informal sector, they talk about it with a lot of imprecision and use these terms interchangeably. But we're talking about the informal sector. We're talking about production, employment that's unincorporated, small and unregistered businesses. Informal employment is about legal or social protection, both inside and outside the formal economy. So you can be an informal worker working for a formal economic activity. And the informal economy is all of these workers and their output. And so two things we focus on in the paper is the status and the place of work. So, we are focused on self-employed workers, and typically, by and large, in most regions, these workers do not have a lot of employees. They're self-employed, as opposed to being an employer who hires others. And many times, informal workers are contributing to a family business. One thing that's very interesting in this paper is that I think in the global north, when we think about employment, we think about working in places like this, right? We think about an office, you kind of go there, you commute there, you show up, offices, schools, hospitals. We think about very, stores, shops, very formal settings. But informal work often happens in people's homes and often happens in public space and in construction sites and in transportation. And we touch upon informal very briefly. We also touch upon informal construction work and informal transportation workers in the paper. But it's a different way of thinking about work. And just to give you some examples, if you're sort of thinking, if you're not familiar with informal workers, all the different types of economic activities and livelihood activities that they do in streets and in open spaces and homes and workshops, they're making shoes, they're sewing textiles, elite soccer balls, airplane cushions, packaging pharmaceuticals, processing solid waste, recycling, and preparing food and vending and trading in open and natural markets. So again, this is sort of the regional picture of urban informality, broken down into smaller geographic regions. These are a series of selected cities, more cities from those regions, and so you can see how large the informal economy is, what a large percent of the urban workforce informal workers are in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. This is an example from India of how informal workers are divided within the urban economy of India. So representing 20% of trade, 12% of construction, 9% of transport, 24% of other services, 27% of manufacturing. It would be interesting maybe to see if our guests, if this is a kind of a similar breakdown in Latin American urban economies, because this is just representing India. But just to give you a sense. So oftentimes people will say, why don't we just formalize? Why don't we just formalize the informal sector? Like the most common policy response. I think I may have even said this to Marty. Like, you know, I'm green to the topic. I said, Marty, why aren't we just talking about formalizing? And she would say, you know, and the WRR is focused on struggling and emerging cities. And, you know, simply cities are not creating formal jobs at a rapid enough pace to for the unemployed, let alone to assume all of the urban informal workers. Many of the urban workers, and so cities think, oh, we're going to formalize, and then we'll collect all these taxes and fees from informal workers. But many of them are operating at a threshold below which they would pay these different kinds of taxes and fees. And many informal workers already pay fees, and I'll give you some examples of that, especially street vendors and different types of informal workers pay fees to actually do their business. So they're already paying operating fees. So this is a very common sort of argument. You know, when you think about what are the sort of costs and benefits or pros and cons of formality versus informality, we think about, you know, formal workers as being more protected, having access to social safety nets, clear labor agreements, more protections for the environment, access to minimum wage, maybe protecting children from different kinds of engaging in different kinds of labor, so there's a minimum working age. And we think about the informal types of employment as being, and this is sort of the stereotypes when we think about them dichotomously. And there's some truth to this, but it's also, I think, much more complex. That we think, oh, it's, you know, informal work is more flexible. You have ease of entry. There's not a high cost in terms of buying a store in order to start your business. You know, it encourages creativity and entrepreneurialism, and it produces convenient and inexpensive goods for people around the world. So one thing we do in the paper is we talk about exclusionary practices that cities have engaged in terms of relocating workers who are much of home-based work happens in informal settlements or low-income communities. And around the world, Mexico, Brazil, Egypt, we see informal settlements being destroyed and those informal businesses being pushed to the urban periphery. Street vendors are often subject to harassment, confiscation, evictions. Waste pickers denied access to bid for solid waste and rights to bid on public contracts. And so we go as a convener of informal workers, creating platforms and engaging with them, has come up with an articulation of what are the collective needs and demands of informal workers. So the icons on the top represent sort of the collective demands of informal workers across the different sectors that WeGo works with, and then the very specific needs and demands of the specific self-employed workers that the paper focuses on. And I'll go through these. I have a slide on each one. So the needs and demands of home-based workers are affordable and secure housing, access to public services, particularly energy and public transportation, more flexible zoning regulations that allow for a mix of residential, commercial, and different types of production happening in the home, and occupational health and safety. These are the primary sort of needs and demands of this sector. So I want to give you a couple examples. I will sort of tell you the needs, and then I want to give you examples of what cities have been doing to show you how we can work with and be more, in some ways, progressive or flexible in our engagement with informal workers and their economic activities. So SEWA represents about 1.5 million informal workers in India, and they have 3 sister organizations. One which is a cooperative-owned bank, another which deals with housing finance, our housing trust company, and another one that assists with housing improvement. And SEWA helps mobilize informal workers and helps them gain security and adequate housing, as well as access to core services through participatory planning and finance. Another example of progressive strategies towards home-based workers is HomeNet Thailand, which advocated for national policy, the Universal Health Coverage Scheme, Home Workers Protection Act, and the Domestic Workers Ministerial Regulation, which dealt with things like minimum wage, access to universal health care for home-based workers and informal workers, as well as occupational health and safety regulations to protect home-based workers. So street vendors, their needs and demands largely revolve around access to public space, security of eviction, access to public space and core services, and in spaces where there is natural pedestrian traffic and natural markets. So that is, zoning for these natural markets to allow them to vend, fair access to vending and licensing permits. So oftentimes while licensing permits and vending permits are available, there's very much quantitatively sort of insufficient to accommodate the number of vendors that need a place to sell and earn their livelihood, and to protect them from harassment, from everything from large-scale evictions of large-scale natural markets to smaller everyday harassment by police and other people enforcing urban regulations. So one example we have from India of more inclusive policies towards street vendors and people who vend in markets is from Bhubaneswar in India, where they were one of the first cities in India to really recognize the contribution of informal street vendors and implement the national policy to accommodate vendors. So in 2007, they started negotiating with the vendors, and through prior to 2007, the relationship with the vendors was very antagonistic, with raids happening on different vending sites, the vendors going away, a few weeks later coming back. It was sort of a cat and mouse kind of situation that really was a lose-lose for both the city and essentially the working poor that were working as vendors. But in 2007, they started working through a series of negotiations to create 54 vending sites and 2,600 fixed kiosks to accommodate the vendors. But it's given as an example in the paper of one of the first cities in India to really try to implement the national vending policy. In terms of Budra Fort, in 2011, the Ahmedabad Municipal Commission decided that they were going to renovate this fort, where there had been a lot of, which actually had been a marketplace for hundreds and hundreds of years, and there was a lot of vendors in that location. And there were plans to evict them, but no place to actually relocate them when it was decided that they were going to renovate the fort. And so again, the vendors and the city, the vendors took this case to the India High Court, and they won a case to stop actually the relocation or forcible relocation of the vendors, and they started a process through different organizations to negotiate fixed vending sites. And up until recently, there are 503 vendors that have been given a fixed place to sell, and they're still waiting for identification cards. But again, this was negotiated with the help of SEWA, WeGo, and different representatives of informal workers. Another really interesting case of cities kind of coming around to thinking about how they can support and work with informal vendors is the story of Warwick Junction in Durban, South Africa. So prior to the World Cup, Durban had been very progressive in their interactions with these informal workers at Warwick Junction, and they were working with them on providing fire extinguishers in the marketplace, different kinds of access to services through the market. But leading up to the World Cup and sort of the change in emphasis to focus on big infrastructure, they had a plan to actually remove Warwick Junction Marketplace and build a huge mall. And this mall was not openly bid for. And through a series of 2 court cases, and in the process, 2 workers for the city left the city and started an NGO actually to continue to work with the informal workers. But through winning 2 court cases, they were able to stop the construction of the mall and maintain this natural marketplace in which to vend. And they had a third court case that they won, which protects street vendors from having their goods illegally confiscated. And I won't talk a lot about this because our guests today really are going to talk about this sector, but the paper also talks, as its third sector of self-employed workers, talks about waste pickers and what they need in terms of accessing waste and in terms of having their access to their own tools and equipment. And we have most of our examples in the paper of progressive urban attitudes towards waste pickers come from Latin America. So it's 30 years of interesting examples from Colombia, Brazil, Argentina, and we have a few examples of more progressive urban policies about waste pickers in South Africa, as well as in India, in Pune and Bangalore. But I will not. You guys are the experts, so I'll let you kind of give us the best examples. But the end of the paper ends with, in each of our WR papers, we try to have what we call sort of actionable solution sets for cities. So if you're a struggling and emerging city and you want to think about how to work in a more productive way with informal workers and support their livelihoods, we have sort of 3 areas of action, and actually we're doing this call to action for cities, struggling and emerging cities. The first is providing better public access to public services, public space, and public procurement of resources. So cities need to work with informal workers and particularly home-based workers through the protection of informal settlements and through the provision of public services and access to public space. The second is that many cities need to think about how to reform their laws and regulations to support informal workers, helping them register their business, thinking about when they should be paying income tax and other kinds of fees and taxes, thinking about progressive, transparent systems of taxation, as well as what services informal workers will get in exchange for paying taxes. Informal workers and policymakers, we need to set better rules, more transparent. We need to include them in participatory rules and policy making. We emphasize in the paper that if they're not brought into the process, as we saw with a lot of case studies in the paper, there's often an inequitable, undesirable outcome. And finally, we felt, and we think that there's significant evidence through WeGo's experience working with informal workers, that coalitions for change and through being organized, that these cities can accommodate informality and informal workers through equitable urban policies, new regulations, that through this process, through this collective organizing, we see very positive outcomes. One really important thing in the paper is, though, in each one of these case studies, there was often progress and then setbacks. And so it was never the case, or I think there was maybe one case, which we don't have time to go into, maybe in South Africa and the post-apartheid that we point to in the paper, where you had a lot of children of informal workers who came into political power. And in that one instance, you sort of have the leadership without sort of this pressure or collective organizing, coming up with more progressive policies. But in every single one of these cases, the pressure and the organizing and the legal cases and the advocacy needed to be continuous in order to keep things going. So that's all from me. Thank you.
Well, hello to everybody. I'm going to make a general presentation on what's going on in Latin America, mainly in South America, on inclusive recycling, and then we're going to listen to Silvio Ruiz. He's a waste picker from Colombia. He's a leader of a very interesting process of formalization. And Severino Lima Jr. is a Brazilian leader. Brazil and Colombia are 2 of the countries with the most interesting process in inclusive recycling in Latin America, so it's great to have them here. And also we have here my colleague and friend and boss, Gonzalo Roqué, who is the coordinator of the inclusive recycling strategy in Avina Foundation. You have seen in Facebook, no, how much plastic and waste are going to the oceans, and it is because we don't have in our countries the proper systems to manage the waste. As we don't recycle those materials, as we put them in the rivers, in the sea, we generate all this problem, and we're trying to go to taking advantage of these materials through value chains. And there is a data that is kind of a scandal for us, because just 2% of the cities of Latin America has some formal program of recycling, but the cities in Latin America spend between 20 and 40% of all their budget to manage the waste. So we have huge problems of corruption. We have very few incentives to recycling the materials. And we just, in Latin America, almost all Latin America, we used to recover the waste and put it in a landfill or in a dump site place. Almost 45% of our cities put the waste in dump sites without any technical treatment. And in this picture, we don't have people, but always in Latin America, when you have this kind of system, you will have people living there, recovering material there. In fact, if you go to Guatemala, to Guatemala City, to the capital, in the dump site known as Zona 3, you will find that you have slavery there, you have sex violence against the waste pickers, you have mafias. In fact, the manager of the dump site in Guatemala City is the vice manager of the city. The son of the manager is the director of the commission in the parliament of waste management, and so everything is connected in this system. And each year in Guatemala City, something around 40 waste pickers die because the dump site is in a valley. So when it's the rain season, all the dump site goes down and take with them and bury the waste pickers. It's a complete tragedy. Also, it's a huge business for some people. In Latin America, the militant people used to talk a lot about the 3 R's. You know it very well. But when we talk about the 3 R's, we never thought about how can we do that, which kind of institutions we need, which kind of incentives, which kind of cooperatives, or value chains, etc. So it was just a call for action. So we, waste pickers, lead a movement of inclusive recycling in the last 2 or 3 decades. And what we say is, we have in Latin America, we don't know the data. Victoria already said that the data on informal economy is very hard to recover. Some people talk about 4 million waste pickers in Latin America. Some of them talk about 2 million. We can know that. We have some census exercises in some municipalities in Colombia, maybe in some municipalities in Argentina and in Brazil, but we don't have a number of national populations of waste pickers. This is very interesting. When we talk about waste pickers, everybody focuses on the poverty and the vulnerability of waste pickers. And it's hard to see how they are a very strong logistic system to recover material. They supply to the industry of recycling in Latin America more than 50%. In Sao Paulo, by example, they used to say they take to the industry the 19% of the inputs of recyclable material. So I like to say that we have to solve the problem of the poverty, but we have to notice that they are a very, very efficient and strong supplier for the industry. Of course, they work in the conditions that Victoria just said before. And a huge problem we have in the sector is that we have a very low level of social capital. We have 10%, depending on the country. Maybe in Brazil or in Colombia, we go to 30% of waste pickers organized in a cooperative or something like that, not necessarily formalized. Or what we're doing in Latin America is producing new legislation to include them, to recognize them as formal services organizations for the city, but also for the value chain. And some things that is happening in the region in the last 10 years. Right now, 18 regulations, national regulations, recognize them. in different degrees. In less country, maybe 3 or 4, they receive some payment for the services they're doing in the municipality. And some of the main final consumption companies are adopting some goals on recycling. That's why we exist. This is an alliance between private sector, waste pickers organizations, a foundation, just to try to close the loop of the materials. It's very hard work, and I want to finish in this, listen to Silvio and Severino of how they, 10 years before or 15 years before, their relationship with the government was just with the police, taking out the material they had, taking them out of the streets. And now they're writing with the states, the new laws, they're part of the, in some cities, in a few cities, they're part of the waste management system. So it was just an overview, and I want to go to the questions for them. No sé, ¿cuál quiere arrancar, Silvio o Severino? La primera pregunta es, hasta hace 15 años o incluso menos, la relación entre recicladores y el Estado era la relación con la policía, quitándole los materiales, desplazándolos de los vertederos, de las calles, etc. Y hoy, ustedes dos en particular representan organizaciones que incluso prestan un servicio público y reciben un pago formal por eso. ¿Qué pasó? Cualquiera de los dos que quiera arrancar, ¿qué pasó en este periodo para dar un salto tan impresionante?
Muy buenas tardes para todos y todas. Básicamente la organización de los recicladores, que tiene ya más de 30 años en el caso de Colombia, autoorganización, no por políticas de Estado, sino porque los recicladores decidieron organizarse.
No, pero termina el concepto.
Hicimos reclamaciones jurídicas por contratos públicos de manejo de basura que pretendían privatizar no solamente la recolección de los residuos ordinarios, sino también entregar el trabajo de los recicladores a empresas privadas.
So, Waste Pickers Organization, particularly in Colombia, has over 30 years of existence, and what they started was by struggling for going to justice to claim, because government was trying to privatize collection and disposal, leaving them away from their work, their jobs.
Bueno, y con movilización social, es decir, saliendo a las calles a protestar, organizándonos para trabajar y exigiendo regulación del Estado a través de la Corte Constitucional, se ha venido logrando cambiar la política pública de a poquitos.
So that first stage was mainly about social mobilization, getting on the streets, protest, and with that and demand, and with that strategy, they could make government to start changing the view and some laws that affect them.
Y básicamente conquistamos continuar con nuestro trabajo, es decir, seguir accediendo a los residuos, a la basura, para extraer el material reciclable que estaba en peligro por la privatización, mantener el oficio, reconocer o buscar el reconocimiento de la profesión y empezar a cobrar un servicio a la ciudadanía por el servicio de reciclaje. Que si bien se le pagaba a las compañías públicas o privadas, a los recicladores no se les pagaba. En Colombia empezamos a conquistar el pago por servicio.
So the first victories were about depenalizing the activity to become, so they work become legal, so they could stay at the activity. And then the second stage of victory were about getting paid for what they do, to start to be recognized as a service that needed to be paid by the public sector.
Bueno, por parte de Brasil, buenas tardes a todos. Es un placer estar acá con ustedes, con los que están acompañando por la internet. Por parte de Brasil empieza en 99 la organización de varios recicladores, porque Brasil es muy largo como continente, viajando a Brasilia para juntos intentar organizar un movimiento nacional. Eso nos da como 3 años hasta 2001, donde los recicladores de Brasil de varias partes se encontraron y hicieron su primer congreso nacional.
So the organization, speak portugués or portuñol as you. The organization process in Brazil goes back to 1999. Was the first meeting in Brasilia when people from all over the country, which is also a continent because of its size, met there and start generating the Brazilian movement. And then 3 years later, in 2001, there was the first national meeting of waste pickers in Brazil.
O movimento é criado e inicia-se o trabalho de articular política pública. A gente compreendeu que o trabalho dos catadores no Brasil seria realmente importante a partir do momento em que nos conhecêssemos a nós mesmos, nosso trabalho, e esse conhecimento virasse números para apresentar ao governo federal para que constituísse leis que garantissem nosso direito ao trabalho.
So from that point, they understood that the work of the national movement should focus on advocacy and fighting for public policy that recognize their work. They understood that they should acknowledge themselves as workers and provide data to the government for them to understand the impact of what they do.
Tivemos a sorte de tudo isso acontecer no primeiro mandato do governo Lula, do presidente Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva, onde em uma cerimônia formal recebeu a demanda dos catadores em seu gabinete para que a gente pudesse solicitar do governo federal apoio de recurso para o reconhecimento da profissão catador e recurso para que pudéssemos melhorar a condição de trabalho.
So when Lula became president of Brazil, there was an opportunity for them. They recognized that Lula generated a milestone in the history of the movement of Brazil, in which they were, in a formal activity, they were recognized as formal workers of the waste management system.
E isso foi importante porque criou lei. A primeira lei que foi constituída é a Política Nacional de Saneamento Ambiental, que tem um artigo que prevê a contratação do nosso trabalho como catador para a prestação de serviço de coleta seletiva.
So, from that point, the new national framework, Política Nacional, the national policy for waste management, so that law stated from that day that they are part of all the contracts related to waste management in Brazil.
Em 2010, então, daí lutamos para uma política nacional de resíduos sólidos, que poucos países da América Latina têm. Uma política voltada à destinação adequada dos resíduos gerados e o compromisso entre as empresas, a sociedade civil e com a participação de nós catadores.
So the next step was to fight for a national policy that obliges municipalities to do a proper waste management and a proper disposal, in which recycling should be a part of that. That is the Política Nacional de Resíduos Sólidos.
E isso foi importante porque é um marco histórico na relação do governo com a sociedade civil. Em 2010 se institui a política nacional e o governo sanciona em um salão governamental com vários catadores e várias autoridades, e essa política nacional tem em seu rol mais de 20 artigos que diz que a política tem que ser voltada com a participação do catador.
So that took place in 2010, where the national policy was launched, and that document has at least 20 articles in which waste pickers are mentioned as part of the municipal waste management that should take place in the cities.
Isso foi bastante importante porque fez com que o governo criasse a política pública e aí o governo poderia destinar recurso para o trabalho, para melhorar o trabalho dos catadores, tanto para capacitação quanto para a compra de equipamentos. Eu tenho ideia de que foi investido algo em torno de mais de $1 milhão no segmento durante os 10 anos que a gente estava relacionado com o governo.
So the importance of that law is that from that point it was stated that the state, the government should allocate resources to guarantee their work. So $1 million were allocated in that period for the waste pickers. That budget was allocated directly to the waste pickers and not through municipalities.
Bom, isso valora porque a partir daí os catadores tiveram a oportunidade de se organizar e fazer uma boa prestação de serviço. Hoje o Brasil deve ter mais de 100 contratos de prestação de serviço com base nessa lei de prestação de serviço de coleta seletiva, porta a porta, com as municipalidades.
Based on that law, so far around 100 cities, small and bigger cities in Brazil, have contracts with waste pickers to provide selective collection services in the city.
Fazendo só um parágrafo sobre o trabalho que a gente faz a nível latino-americano, isso é um intercâmbio. A gente primeiro conheceu o trabalho que a Colômbia fazia, que a Colômbia sai na frente com a justiça, com a sua prestação, e o Brasil, opa, vamos fazer aqui também. Então, a Rede Lacre, que é o que a gente representa aqui, ela é esse mecanismo de intercâmbio, de troca de experiência, para que outros países que ainda não têm a organização nacional, ainda não têm os catadores reconhecidos, esse é o trabalho que a gente vem fazendo a nível latino-americano.
So, both Silvio and Severino are part of the Latin American Waste Pickers Network, and that organization allows them and others to interact, to exchange learnings and best practices all around the waste pickers organization. So countries that are in a lower level of development can learn from their experience, mainly Colombia and Brazil, and so all the region converge to a better, to a higher level of organization and rights for all the waste pickers in the country.
I'm going to English after this, but hay unas similitudes entre los procesos de Colombia y Brasil, el oficio histórico de los recicladores, la organización, pero aprovechando que Gonzalo está aquí, el proceso de Argentina es particular en varios sentidos y quisiera preguntarle a él por ese proceso que se vive en Argentina. The process in Colombia and in Brazil have some similarities. The waste pickers were working on this kind of job for some decades. They got finally national legislations, but in Argentina the process is quite different. They don't have a national process. They have some cities, and the origin of the process is different. So I want to take advantage of having Gonzalo here to ask him about the case of Argentina.
As Ricardo said, that's right. In Colombia, Brazil, and some other countries, there was a logic that was first struggle for a national framework and then apply that in different cities. That wasn't the case in Argentina. So far, the national framework in Argentina is 50 years delayed. It's a very lousy national policy. But on the other hand, for example, Buenos Aires City has a large formalization process among waste pickers. More than half the waste pickers are part of the public policy. 12 cooperatives have a contract with the city. The city has invest $50 million a year in the work of the organized waste pickers. They are supposedly, because things don't work perfectly well, but supposedly they are entitled to manage all the recyclable waste of the city. That process goes back to 2001, the huge social and economic crisis of Argentina, in which people started going to the streets and the dams to pick up waste to get something to live from, and the joint or the meeting between this sector of waste pickers and some social activists that in that days were very active generated some of the strongest organizations that lead the process of generating the public policy that now states in Buenos Aires. It is a very, very interesting, with a lot of learnings process. The one in Buenos Aires, we are trying to. It generated a very, I don't know how to say in English, disequal situation between other cities of the country. So we're trying to, as they were saying about countries in Latin America, also that happens inside countries. In Argentina, we're trying to work with other cities in which waste speakers are still in the lowest conditions, and we believe that the example of Buenos Aires City could lead in the same direction. Sadly, right now we are facing some challenges, especially regarding waste to energy projects. Buenos Aires City has just changed its zero waste law, allowing waste to energy. We feel that since recycling is not so far consolidating and resilient, if we accept these kind of technologies, that could go against the interest of the sustainable development of the city, and mainly against the work of 6,000 people that already have achieved rights and better conditions, and they could lose it. So that's the main struggle in which we are right now. At this very moment, there was a meeting in Buenos Aires that I couldn't be in, that was about that, because there's a lot to be done, not only to care for the job of the waste speakers, mainly for that, but also to care for the environment and the well development of the city. We believe that it won't be a good way for Buenos Aires to go that. I know this isn't exactly the main issue of this webinar, but I wanted to take the opportunity. I know maybe
I'm going to the obstacles and the challenges, because when we hear the short version of Silvio and Severino, it seems like it was like linear process of progressing all the time, no? But as Victoria said before, we already are giving some steps forward and some steps backward. And I want to ask them about this, about what is the recycling is like obvious. We will have to do that, but why it is so hard to achieve the goal of recycling with inclusion? No, there's a lot of obstacles, challenges, etc. So I want to ask them for their own view of that. Decía yo que al oír la historia así contada corta parece un proceso lineal de progreso permanente, pero en realidad son 2 pasos adelante, 1 paso atrás, etcétera. Que parecería muy obvio que deberíamos reciclar y hacerlo con inclusión social, pero hay unos desafíos, unos obstáculos, unos intereses que se oponen. ¿Por qué no nos cuentan un poco más de esas dificultades en cada contexto?
Digamos que lo primero es que normalmente en nuestro continente y en el sur del planeta también, África, Asia y Latinoamérica, los recicladores han sido invisibles para la sociedad, están en el patio de atrás del botadero, nadie va, los políticos no llegan, las políticas públicas no llegan, los recursos no llegan.
First of all, we have to say that for many, many years, waste pickers have been invisible for society, for decision-making people, decision makers. The resources, public policies never reached them, never were applied to them, and they were in the backyard of society.
Normalmente cuando se ha estudiado el saneamiento básico, históricamente, se ha visto la basura, pero no se ha visto a los seres humanos. Se han buscado soluciones técnicas para la basura, que nuestras ciudades y países dejen de tirar la basura a los ríos y a los cuerpos de agua, que no la quemen a cielo abierto o que no la depositen en vertederos. Se diseñan alternativas técnicas, tecnológicas y económicas para el tratamiento de la basura, pero no a las personas. Entonces los recicladores normalmente quedan desplazados de su forma de trabajo, no tienen alternativa y tienen que salir de los botaderos a las calles de las ciudades a recuperar de la basura que además la sociedad no separa normalmente, a buscar de ahí, pegar el material reciclable para poder llevar pan a su casa.
Usually, when governments think of how to solve waste, they see garbage, but they don't see people. They think of technical solutions, but they don't consider that people that are behind that. And that exclusion of these people obliges them to survive by interfering with that, by going to pick the waste on the streets or on the dumps, or so that is that initially they were never considered as part of these solutions that were developed by governments.
Bueno, y cuando los recicladores levantan su voz, empiezan a organizarse, empiezan a ser visibles por su propia gestión, vienen otros conflictos, ¿no? El conflicto con las empresas de aseo que quieren coger el material de los recicladores, con políticos corruptos o funcionarios corruptos que quieren desaparecer a los recicladores del entorno porque se ven feos, porque no gustan para la estética de las ciudades. Entonces viene un periodo de persecución al trabajo de los recicladores, incluso a las personas recicladoras. Tenemos muchísimas historias de asesinatos y desaparición de recicladores por el solo hecho de trabajar con la basura, estar estorbando en las ciudades. Entonces viene un periodo como de reclamación de justicia social, de reconocimiento y de protección a la vida, ¿no? Lógicamente.
When they design these systems based on technology and capital investment, there's also many companies involved. Waste management has a lot of money around it, and that creates a scenario of conflict interest, of corruption, of policy campaigns. So they support political campaigns, and so when waste pickers started to put their voice and ask for part of that, it generates conflicts, it generates persecution, it generates a lot of things that they should face in order to be recognized.
Sí, hace parte de la economía informal, precisamente como estaba explicándonos el estudio. Hay que sobrevivir de alguna manera, si no tienes contratos, si no tienes empleo, si no tienes educación, tienes que sobrevivir, llevar pan a tu casa, y es parte de la realidad de más de 4 millones en el continente. ¿Sí? Es decir, hay algunas experiencias exitosas en algunas ciudades de algunos países, pero la mayoría de los recicladores hoy están como hace 30 años estábamos los recicladores en Colombia o Brasil.
That's the situation for most of the waste pickers in the region. They still have to survive informally, picking up waste and selling on the market at a very low prices. And even though there are some cities in which they have already been formalized, the main reality around the continent is that the waste pickers are informal workers.
Imagina segmento que em várias partes da América Latina está desde de forma desorganizada dentro de um aterro sanitário, de um basureiro, trabalhando na rua sem nenhuma condição, há alguns empreendimentos que já estão numa linha de separação, prestando serviço com contrato. Então, você imagina que a gente tem várias situações dentro do país, dentro da América Latina.
Yeah, there is different levels of maturity or development of waste pickers. You have some of them in some facilities with technology and conditions to work with more dignity, but also you have a lot of people in the streets recovering down the rain, selling to the middlemen with low prices and all of that.
Nosso trabalho como liderança é tentar nivelar e preparar os que ainda não estão preparados para ascender esse nível de contratação. E há muitos que não têm alfabetização, muitos que não acreditam que o seu trabalho é importante, muitos que não se conhecem como reciclador porque a sociedade não vê.
So the work they do as leaders of the movement is trying to take the more vulnerable waste speakers to the level of the more organized. A lot of them doesn't have any education, even they don't have a good image of themselves. They could be ashamed, I don't know if that's the word, because of the idea of society has of this work. So the struggle, the work they do as leaders is trying to take them to the level of be in the capability of deliver services for the municipalities and the companies.
Isso como uma das dificuldades. Segunda dificuldade, as leis que a gente consegue constituir, falando um pouco da parte do Brasil, a política nacional foi constituída, mas não quer dizer que os governantes que estão aí vão cumprir elas. Muitos vão por trás tentar mudar a legislação, como os corruptos, como os que estão ligados a empresas de incineração, que querem tomar essa fatia, que é uma conquista dos catadores. Isso também passa, não é que criou a lei, está pronto. A aplicação da lei é outra coisa muito mais difícil. Se nós, organizados, não tiver o olho ali de que alguém pode querer mudar a lei para benefício de uma empresa, a gente também pode ser, em algum momento, retirado do sistema.
Well, they have to deal with the success of having national laws, because the national laws are very nice. They produce new rents for the system. So it's very hard to implement it in the municipal level, as some of the actors of the municipality wants to capture the benefits and the rents the national law has created. And even more, some companies that never wanted to do nothing with recycling, as now there are some money for the service, want to put the waste pickers away of the system, out of the system.
Hoje no Brasil, os investimentos já não há, porque o governo que está não reconhece a lei, não cumpre a lei e tampouco reconhece o catador. Desde que o governo, o golpe que houve no Brasil, a gente não tem nenhuma relação com o governo federal.
I think all of you are familiar with the in English how to say golpe.
The golpe.
With the change of government.
The bad change.
The change is like a sweet version of what he said. With I don't know how to say, with the tricky change of government. Well, the color of the politics also changed, and so since Temer is in the power, there is no additional investments of the federal government on waste pickers.
Porém, com a força que nós temos, continuamos nos relacionando diretamente com as empresas, né, por conta da lei. A lei criou um acordo setorial que permite os catadores estar relacionados com as empresas numa relação de cumprimento de metas de recoleção de material reciclável, que se chama acordo setorial, e isso passa uma pequena parte de recurso para que a gente possa estar executando o nosso trabalho de organização, isso a nível de Brasil.
Yeah, but specifically in Brazil, the law established some rules known as extended producer responsibility that put some obligations on private companies to help to recover the material and recycle it. And that allows waste pickers to deliver some services to the companies in the framework of what they call this acuerdo sectorial. Is a sectoral agreement. And this is, well, at least they have that when the government is not, federal government is not putting additional resources for them.
E como terceiro ponto, porque falamos de 2 pontos, não menos pequeno, a questão da inovação tecnológica, os novos temas que trazem para a mesa para ser constituída com o trabalho que a gente vê. Olha, a gente tem catador no nível de está no basural, no lixão. Precisamos acender a cadeia produtiva para a parte de reciclagem, para melhorar o produto, para melhorar a renda do catador, que é a inovação tecnológica, e dentro de um viés que é importante esse tipo de estudo, que é o viés dos novos tempos. Hoje a gente se pega discutindo o nosso papel na economia circular, que é um tema que se discute há muito tempo na academia, mas que a gente, como catador, está envolvido nele, e se a gente não se envolve, vem outros atores e nos retiram porque a gente não sabe falar inglês, ou porque não sabe falar espanhol, ou porque não tem a educação técnica, o conhecimento técnico. Imagine, são três pontos importantes que, não só como lideranças do movimento, a gente precisa ter aliados fortes, né? A academia, as instituições que apoiam o nosso trabalho, que reconhecem e apoiam, para poder a gente dizer, estamos aqui com a oportunidade de falar com nossa própria voz, né? E isso é importante para o segmento de recicladores.
There is a very interesting issue that Severino is raising, that we need technological innovation to recover better the material, to benefit the material, to dignify the work of the waste pickers. But with technical innovation also comes the dilemmas on how can they participate on the new innovations, in the new technologies, but also in the new discussions. By example, maybe you have heard a very recently popular term known as circular economy. So it's like the new frame of sustainable development, and in these frontier discussions, there is a risk of being excluded again because they don't speak English, because they don't have the technical knowledge, because some prejudices too. So he's saying that's why they need the support of some allies that recognize them and support them with these skills. Do you have some questions? We can open now for your questions. Please go ahead.
Severino acaba de hablar de un problema muy particular, que es el cambio político que pasó en Brasil. Creo que en Colombia y en Bogotá particularmente pasó algo muy parecido. Me gustaría que Silvio nos hablara un poquito de cómo fue ese cambio político, qué pasó con los recicladores en Bogotá y qué perspectivas tienen de aquí en adelante y cómo ven que eso puede cambiar. Lo digo, ya lo traduzco, y lo digo particularmente porque me pareció muy interesante lo que Victoria dijo al principio, de cómo se toman varios pasos hacia adelante y después se los echan otra vez para atrás. So my question is, I was very interested about what Victoria said, how on all of these social policies, people take a lot of steps forward, but then many more back. So I was interested in hearing from Silvio exactly what happened in Bogota and what are their perspectives right now with something that happened also in Brazil with the change of party, and how that had a huge impact in what the Supreme Court said about inclusive.
Digamos que en la experiencia colombiana, que es una cosa de las que estamos muy orgullosos de transmitir a los recicladores del continente, es que la ruta nuestra fue por derechos fundamentales ante la Corte Constitucional. A diferencia, sin ser mala la experiencia de Brasil, tiene una dificultad adicional, y es que tiene que depender de la voluntad política del funcionario de turno. Un programa de gobierno, si quiere hacerlo o no hacerlo. En el caso de Colombia, al nosotros acudir a la Corte Constitucional, las sentencias de la Corte suben a nivel de constitución política del país, y independientemente del funcionario que esté o no esté, debe cumplirla. No está garantizado que la cumpla, pero debe cumplirla. Y si no la cumple, nosotros podemos hacer demanda de desacato o inconstitucionalidad de una norma o de una política. Y en ese caso, con el cambio de alcalde, lo que sucedió fue que, bueno, primero dijo que salió un día a decir que la gente de bien separaba los residuos y que los recicladores eran innecesarios para la ciudad. Nosotros cogimos la imagen del alcalde, la de Peñalosa, en ese caso, la pusimos en una caneca de basura y pusimos la gente de bien sabe dónde está la basura, ¿sí? Para contrarrestar esa mala publicidad que él con todo su poder pues estaba haciendo contra los recicladores. Esto hizo que en la licitación de aseo, y perdón que me extienda para el translation, hizo que en la licitación que acaban de adjudicar dijeran a los empresarios privados de la basura, porque efectivamente iban a privatizar el servicio, que no podían coger el material reciclable. ¿Sí? Entonces, es decir, que esa pelea y una movilización que hicimos de más de 10.000 recicladores en octubre del año pasado, más los mensajes, pusieron a cada quien en su sitio. ¿Sí? Los empresarios, por ahora, los empresarios del aseo con la basura normal, los recicladores con el reciclaje. El peligro mantiene todos los días.
Well, this is very interesting of working with waste pickers organized. He was talking about the struggle on constitutional law, and that was the path Colombia waste pickers follow to get the recognition. He said there is a difference between Colombia and Brazil. In Brazil it was a governmental program, but in Colombia was a recognition in the constitution. So the government has to take care of that independently of the political color. Of course, political color has effect. No? By example, the current mayor said in the media he's a very, very bad communicator. He always has awful messages. He said, good people know how to segregate waste in Colombia. That's a lie. So we don't need waste pickers. And waste pickers answered to him, putting his image on a waste bin, saying good people know where waste is. So that was a political struggle, and as an effect of that struggle, in the recent call for proposals for the public service of waste management in Bogota, they said to the participant of this call of proposals, you will work just with the ordinary garbage. You cannot recover the recyclable material. This is a victory, but every day is a struggle. Voy a agregar que las compañías están intentando de todas maneras.
Aunque está prohibido por contrato.
Even the conditions, the prohibitions in the contract, companies are trying and are recovering material from the waste pickers because as they got recognition in the waste fee of the city for their work, the companies can go for that waste fee that belongs to waste pickers. This happens every day. It's a very hard struggle. Where you have this amount of money around the waste, you will have people trying to take advantage of it.
I wanna add something. When it comes to social conquers, there's a big issue on resilience, how to make that conquers resilient, especially when that conquers are about rights for going from informality to formality, from and citizen rights for people who didn't have them. So it's very important for us to learn what experiences have worked and which ones have not. And what Silvio said is very important because many times social organizations, because it's what they can, they reach agreement with governments, but that is not is not materialized in public policy, and that's a high risk for resilience. And on the other side, what we aim for and what we work for is for that conquers to be crystallized in laws, in national frameworks, in public policies that are by nature more resilient than agreements or contracts. So that's a learning we've achieved in our 10 years of work, and I'm sure we all have much more that could be useful to provide more resilience to all these social concourse and processes.
What do you predict for the status for inclusive recycling in LATAM in 5/10 years? If you need to select 3 strategies to accomplish it, what would you do?
¿Cuál creen ustedes que va a ser el estatus de este tema dentro de 5 años? Y si hubiera que hacer 3 cosas, 3 estrategias, ¿cuáles serían?
En 5 años no va a cambiar radicalmente Latinoamérica en la cultura todavía. Nos faltan desafortunadamente varias décadas para que los habitantes de nuestros países en Latinoamérica entiendan la importancia del reciclaje y pasen a separar los residuos en origen. Eso es un paso hacia el que tenemos que ir, pero pues en 5 años no, desafortunadamente no lo vamos a conquistar todavía, vamos a ir avanzando. Es unas décadas más. La otra, los recicladores tienen que fortalecerse mucho, organizarse mucho, crecer en los niveles de vinculación a cooperativas, asociaciones, movimientos, ser conscientes de su trabajo. Y la otra, que esperamos que suceda en 5 años, ojalá, es que el continente o la mayoría de países del continente empiezan a pagarle a los recicladores por el servicio de reciclaje, porque eso quebraría la trampa de pobreza en la que estamos los recicladores. ¿Sí? Si yo vendo el material reciclable, pero además la sociedad me paga por servicio, puedo empezar a salir de la pobreza y de la trampa en la que la pobreza me mantiene vulnerable.
Well, 5 years is a very short term to achieve big changes, but the 3 changes he would like to see in the region in these 5 years is, first, citizenship making the segregation of waste in their houses. This is very important for the dignity of waste pickers, but also for the quality of the materials. The second one is we need waste pickers organized, well organized, to deliver service, to struggle in the country for their rights, etc. And the third one is we need that all of our countries pay for the services that waste pickers already are delivering to the city.
Para mim, nos próximos 5 anos, teremos mais de 15 países com seus movimentos e organizações de catadores organizados. Esse é um dos papéis da rede. Hoje nós temos 4 países que têm seus movimentos, temos 17 países que são articulados, né? Com isso estamos trabalhando forte a organização dos catadores na Centro-América, 18 com México, me comenta Silvio, me relembra Silvio, e creio que isso dá uma força muito grande, esse modelo de organização, porque primeiro tem que se organizar para depois lutar por política pública e por investimento.
Okay, Severino is reinforcing the point of Silvio. He said today we have just 4 countries with strong movements, 18 countries with some kind of organization of waste pickers. So the goal for the next 5 years is taking them to the level of organizations of the main 4 countries.
La pregunta en español es más un saludo. Dice, hola Ricardo, un saludo fraterno desde Ecuador por parte de la Red Nacional de Recicladores del Ecuador. Saludos al compañero Silvio, Severino, Gonzalo y todos los asistentes. Nada más felicitar por este espacio y extender un mensaje a todos los compañeros recicladores para continuar en la lucha para que se reconozca nuestra labor como un servicio ambiental a los municipios en favor del ambiente, salud, economía y por limpiar el rostro del mundo con nuestras manos. Saludos, Laura.
Saludos a la RENARREC, que es una red nacional de recicladoras, más que de hombres. En el Ecuador son más las mujeres que están empoderadas en la organización. Hay hombres, pero más las mujeres, las lideranzas femeninas en general en el continente son muy fuertes en la organización. Norita, Laura, Mónica, Claudette, bueno, cantidad de mujeres en el movimiento latinoamericano. Un saludo a la RENARREC, que es nuestra organización hermana del alma, que también es un proceso que va muy bien. Están haciendo un proceso de negociación, de cierre de vertederos, de botaderos, donde hay recicladores con alternativas. Es un modelo muy interesante que no es de entrar la policía a levantar a los recicladores, sino una transformación en la mente de funcionarios públicos conscientes que permiten alternativas para los recicladores del Ecuador, y ese es un modelo a exportar también a Centroamérica, Laura y compañeros de la RENARREC.
It was a message from a network of waste pickers, mainly women, in Ecuador. This is very interesting. They connected to this webinar. They want to learn what we're discussing regionally about this matter, and they struggling very hard for the recognition of their country. In fact, they're working with some municipalities in some process of closing dump sites to go for municipal systems of inclusive recycling. So for us, it's very interesting that waste pickers are connected with new technologies, with the discussions. They don't want to be out just doing the work in the streets. They want to be part of the discussion.
Yes.
Some other message for Torreón in Mexico. They're talking about an experience they have there.
Solo una cosa importante. Acabamos de hacer ahorita en marzo una cumbre regional de reciclaje inclusivo en Bogotá, Colombia, y por primera vez vinieron 4 recicladores de México a participar de la asamblea de la red latinoamericana y del evento, y ya tenemos ahí esos lazos con los compañeros pepenadores mexicanos.
We had a regional conference in Bogotá 2 months ago on inclusive recycling, and we had for the first time the participation of 4 waste speakers from Mexico. They came for the first time to do the assembly of Latin American Waste Speakers Network. So that's a good news for us. Thank you all for everything.